Bluetongue is a seasonal disease that mainly occurs in summer and autumn, especially after good rains. Dr. Marco Romito from Onderstepoort Veterinary Institute sheds some light on how to beat this virus. Die International Fresh Produce Association het onlangs 'n geleentheid aangebied met die tema Herlewingslandbou. Bly ingeskakel vir 'n insetsel hieroor. Ons skakel nou wel eers oor na Lise toe vir die jongste landbounuus.
Elanco, we are driven by our vision of food and companionship, enriching life.
In vandag se landbounuus, Vrystaat Landbou het onlangs kommer uitgespreek oor beurtkrag en die gepaardgaande verlies aan selfoon-ontvangs wat tot verhoogde misdaad in die platteland lei. Die organisasie se Dr. Jane Buys meen hulle ontvang al hoe meer klagtes van hulle lede oor 'n tekort aan selfoonsein in hul areas. Bykans 7 uit 10 boere het aangedui dat hulle tussen 1 en 4 misdaadinsidente oor die afgelope 3 maande tydens beurtkrag ervaar het. Die opname het ook uitgewys dat bykans 60% van plaaswerkers en hul families as gevolg van die probleem nie nooddienste in die hande kon kry nie. Vrystaat Landbou het 'n beroep op selfoondiensverskaffers gedoen om dringend in te gryp. And the ambassador of Japan to Egypt has signed a $3.8 million deal to help Egypt improve its agricultural productivity for food security. The project will support the Egyptian government's efforts to ensure food security by increasing agricultural water productivity and resilience to climate change. It will target small-scale farmers in the rural areas of Upper Egypt and the Nile Delta by introducing modern irrigation facilities and solar-powered pumps and installing agrivoltaic greenhouses. The project will also help to provide highly efficient attachments for tractors as well as heat and saline-tolerant crop varieties. The global garlic market is experiencing mixed fortunes, according to reports from around the world. In the Netherlands, the demand for garlic remains stable, but prices are lagging behind expectations. Meanwhile, German importers report a good start to the season for fresh garlic from Egypt. Spain is also experiencing slow sales with higher stocks than last year due to stagnant demand in Europe. South African garlic growers are facing a tough season due to high rainfall for the 3rd consecutive year, resulting in post-harvest problems and a shortage of local Class 1 garlic. And that's today's news. Our next topic of discussion is on Bluetongue, and as we are aware, we do have problems with available vaccines in South Africa, but that's not our topic of discussion today. We will find out exactly what is Bluetongue and how to prevent and control this disease. I'd like to welcome Dr. Marco Romito. He's from the ARC at Onderstepoort. Dr. Romito, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, what is Bluetongue? Explain to us.
All right. Okay. Bluetongue is a disease of ruminants, in particular sheep. The virus that causes it is found in many different ruminant species, but the disease is usually manifested in sheep, to a lesser degree in cattle, and goats can also get infected, but usually they don't develop disease. Many wild animals as well, ruminants, and interesting enough, also carnivores can become infected. So it's a disease that's endemic in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, but it has now spread globally, and over the last half century has spread to all continents where there are ruminants present, and it's become of great concern because of its big impact on production, import and exports as well. So there's a very significant economic impact with regards to Bluetongue.
What is the cause?
It's caused by a virus, the Bluetongue virus, and it's characterized by many different serotypes. At the moment, there are 27 different serotypes, which complicates vaccine production as well. We have most of the serotypes present in South Africa and in Africa, fewer serotypes elsewhere. And interestingly enough, the virus was first isolated and characterized at Onderstepoort. In the 1960s, Dr. Daan Verwoerd, in fact, was able to show that this virus has a double-stranded RNA genome, a really important discovery. And there's been a lot of research that's been taking place at Onderstepoort over the years, right from its inception in 1908 onwards. So it's a rich history of research on Bluetongue.
What are the clinical signs? I mean, you're talking about a blue tongue. Does the animal have a blue tongue?
Yes, occasionally one does see that, the typical swollen tongue that becomes congested and cyanotic, which is this blue discoloration. But basically you have swelling of the head, the mouth, the ears, and it can get small hemorrhages as well within the mouth. You can get severe inflammation of the nasal cavities, and also internally you can get hemorrhages present. It can also cause lameness because of inflammation of the coronet above the claws, and muscle damage can also occur. And in pregnant animals, you can get abortions, depending on the stage of infection. So those are more or less the symptoms that you would get. In many cases, you may only get mild symptoms, only fever reactions or stiffness. And in cattle, the symptoms usually tend to be mild or inapparent. In the case of indigenous breeds of sheep, you usually don't see any symptoms at all. It's basically the European breeds that have been imported to the country. In fact, the first cases of Bluetongue were first noticed in merino sheep that were brought in the 18th century into South Africa. And so it's the European fine wool breeds that are most susceptible, and we can get quite high morbidity and even mortality rates occurring amongst them, especially the younger animals.
So how do we control and prevent Bluetongue?
The mainstay remains vaccination. Apart from vaccination, also vector control, which isn't very practical. The Culicoides midge, the midge is the vector of this virus, is prevalent throughout the country except the very high-lying areas, but one can try and minimize exposure to the vector by moving animals away from areas where the density is high, for instance, around lower-lying areas or around marshes or flays, and perhaps putting them into barns or making use of insect repellents. But vaccination remains the important approach to control the disease, and you need to apply 3 doses. 3 different bottles have to be used, A, B, and C, and have to be administered at 3-week intervals. And that covers most of the important serotypes. There's 15 of the serotypes that are included in the bottle, and that needs to be administered to young animals. It shouldn't be administered too early because maternal antibodies can interfere with the vaccine. So you should not administer it to a very young animal. They should be protected if the ewe has been immunized. And this can cause problems because there's a period when, if you administer it, when there are too high levels of antibodies from the mother in the lamb, that can interfere with the vaccine because it's a live virus. The vaccine is a live attenuated vaccine. And so that can be an area of a grey area when one has to be careful. And it also depends on your lambing season, spring lambing versus autumn lambing. Autumn lambing has the advantage that the lambs, once the antibodies start to wane, the season has more or less come to an end. Usually the peak of Bluetongue is in the middle of summer, and it extends into autumn and early winter. So when the lambs get born, if they're spring lambs, the autumn lambs, for instance, when they are born, it's about the incidence of Bluetongue is at its peak and starts to wane thereafter. So once the antibodies drop, usually there's no longer Bluetongue around. And then you can vaccinate them after a sufficient interval. You need to wait a sufficient time period of 3 to 6 months before you can vaccinate them. And vaccination should be done yearly to bolster the immune response because of all these different serotypes. You may not always get an adequate response to each and every one, so you need these boosters that have to be given on a yearly basis. So after 2 or 3 boosts, you should have adequate immunity covering all the important serotypes.
Now, I'm sure we all are aware that we have a problem with enough vaccines in South Africa. So plan B, would that be what you referred to right in the beginning? Yes. Of moving your animals away, keeping them out of the danger zone? Am I correct?
That's correct. And housing animals in barns, if that's possible, or selected animals, making use of insect repellents, insecticidal or insect repellent prints on netting over the windows, etc. That's perhaps the best solution that one can have as an alternative. Yeah.
In the beginning, I mentioned that you are at Onderstepoort and you are busy with research activities. Talk to us about that.
I myself am not involved with actual research. I'm actually more involved with routine diagnostic work, but there's been a very long, rich history of research going right back to its foundation in 1908. Arnold Tyler, the founder, already had shown right early on that this disease is caused by a filtrable agent, in other words, not a bacterium, but what we now know as a virus. And he was also able to develop the very first primitive vaccine that was reasonably effective. And he also had indications that there were different strains present. And subsequent researchers were able to show that all these different serotypes. Dr. Knights proved that already in the 1940s. Dr. Dutoy showed that the Culicoides midge is involved with the spread of this virus. Interesting enough, this is the same vector for African horsetail, which is a similar virus to Bluetongue virus. Both belong to the orbivirus genus of the Reoviridae family. Same vector, same epidemiology. So they showed that this midge plays an important role in the spread as it's a biological vector. And then subsequently to that, you had a discovery of the double-stranded RNA genome by Dr. Daan Verwoerd in the 1960s and the molecular characterization of the virus. And then thereafter, you had various different researchers looking at the different components of the virus, cloning the genes, expressing the proteins, and some of the preliminary work towards subunit vaccines and alternatives to the current vaccines. A lot of research is going on at the moment internationally because it's become a disease of concern in many different countries. So looking at new vaccines using new techniques, using recombinant DNA technology and genetic engineering to create new vaccines that are perhaps more effective. And apart from that, there's also research going on into the disease, how it develops, what are the mechanisms of interaction of the virus with its host, and also looking at ways of modulating immune responses, etc. Disease pathogenesis is the other area of interest.
Well, we're looking forward to the news on more vaccines. I think that's what we all want in South Africa. Dr. Romito, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And that was all about Bluetongue.
Controle vir Fortuner. Julle trek ongekende terrein, hoor? Hoor jou controle? Ontdek dit. Kom in Fortuner, rowwe terrein op pad. Aktiveer 4x4. Ontvang, gereed vir aksie. Missie voltooi, papa.
Die splinternuwe Toyota Fortuner.
Controle, daar's 'n probleem.
Gee jou verbeelding die luksheid van vryheid.
Ja, vandag wil ons bietjie met die boere gesels en 'n klein les gee rondom grafieke, want ons het die laaste week gehoor dat daardie groot bank wat almal gebruik het om kriptogeldeenhede geld te leen, skielik bankrot gespeel het. En dit is SVB. En dit is heel eenvoudig, dit is daardie bank, Silicon Valley Bank, wat almal gedink het gaan nooit ondergaan nie, en wat het gebeur? Hy het skielik onder druk gekom en kyk net hoe het hy geval hier van bo af. Maar nou wil ons vir boere 'n les leer. As jy grafieke het, al gebruik jy basiese grafieke, gebruik jou kop en skouer formasie. Ek het dit al so baie op die program gewys. 'n Grafiek wys altyd laat hy waarsku. Nou ja, hier's dit, 'n kop en skouer het die beleggers lankal gewys. Daar's die linkerskouer, daar's die kop, daar's die regterskouer, en toe daai neklyn breek, daar by 562 was dit net al die pad na onder toe, een lyn. Maar hier was 'n ander goue reël wat boere ook kan gebruik. Ek gebruik altyd die 40 week bewegende gemiddelde. Ek het hom ingesit en kyk mooi wat het gebeur. Die aandeel het opgegaan. Hy het probeer om hierdie plekkie te breek wat eintlik weer die momentum na bo sou kry, maar met daai breek het hy die neklyn kom bevestig van hierdie lelike kop en skouer formasie wat gewoonlik 'n waarskuwingsformasie is. Het beleggers geweet dis moeilikheid. So as jy ooit 'n aandeel het of 'n belegging het en hy begin na 'n wonderlike loopie 'n kop en 'n skouer en 'n kop en 'n skouer wys, wees versigtig, want jy kan baie maklik jou vingers verbrand. Hy kan dalk net verbaas en die momentum na onder vat en jou groot skade berokken. So, hou sommer hierdie grafiek so in die agterkop. Dis 'n heel eenvoudige grafiek om te gebruik. Kop en skouer, weeklikse grafiek, 40 week bewegende gemiddelde en jy kan jou baie geld daarmee spaar. Wel, besoek ons webtuiste www.franseklerk.com vir meer inligting en ons gesels weer.
Die International Fresh Produce Association of IFPA het onlangs sy Fresh Solutions geleentheid by die Devonville Golf en Wynland goed naby Stellenbosch aangebied. Die tema van die geleentheid was Herlewingslandbou. Nou Nick van Skalkwyk, uitvoerende direkteur van Restore Africa Funds, was die hoofspreker tydens hierdie geleentheid. En die maatskappy is 'n privaat ekwiteitsfonds wat eksklusief in bewarings- en herlewingslandboupraktyke belê. Ons gesels nou met Nick van Skalkwyk en ons het hom uitgevra oor die konsep van herlewingslandbou of anders gestel klimaatslim boerdery en ook oor die finansiering van die herlewingsprojekte. Nick, eerstens, hoekom is herlewingslandbou nodig?
So landbou is dinamies. Landbou vereis voortdurende vernuwing, innovering. Anders as 'n mens op en met innoveer, stagneer 'n mens, later gaan 'n mens agteruit. In landbou, wat 'n uiters dinamiese omgewing is van kardinale belang om voortdurend te vernuwe, te innoveer. En ons glo dat bewarings- en herlewingslandboupraktyke is een van hierdie praktyke, van hierdie innovasies wat omarm moet word deur landbou en verder geneem te word om in die toekoms relevant te bly, finansiëel en ekologies volhoubaar te bly en die pad te kan stap in die volgende eeu.
Wat beteken herlewingslandbou of klimaatslim boerdery en hoe sien julle klimaatslim praktyke wat toegepas moet word?
Klimaatslim boerderypraktyke is 'n versamelnaam wat die laaste tyd baie algemeen gebruik word. En dit gaan daaroor om in die omgewing van veranderende weerpatrone relevant te bly in die konteks van die boerdery. Elke boerdery, elke konteks is spesifiek en is uiteraard dinamies en daarom moet 'n mens 'n klimaatslim praktyke omarm om gereed te wees vir die toekoms wat voorlê.
Nick, met die oorskakeling na herlewingslandbou is daar in die meeste gevalle 'n periode van kontantvloeidaling voordat die boerdery stabiliseer en groei. Hoekom is dit so?
So klimaatslimpraktyke in Restore Africa Funds se wêreld, hoe ons dit sien, is onder die vaandel van bewarings- en herlewingslandbou. En dit bestaan uit 5 beginsels en die beginsels het dan afhangende van die konteks van die spesifieke grond, spesifieke area, spesifieke plaas, dan verskillende praktiese toepassings. Die 5 beginsels is eerstens minimum of geen grondversteuring. Tweedens gaan dit daaroor dat 'n mens met biodiversiteit in jou landboustelsel inbring. Ons moet besef dat 'n boerdery is 'n ekostelsel op sy eie, maar dan ook funksioneer binne 'n breër ekostelsel. Derdens gaan dit oor dekgewasse of bedekking, grondbedekking, om seker te maak dat in ons land met sy pragtige sonskyn, dat die grondtemperatuur nie so baie varieer nie, en ook dat die grondtemperatuur bevorderlik is vir die organiese aktiwiteit en die biologiese aktiwiteit wat moet plaasvind in die grondekostelsel. Dit help ook wanneer dit reën om van die water op te vang, beter op te vang, om gronderosie te vermy en oor die algemeen net 'n gesonde grondekostelsel te skep. Vierdens gaan dit oor voortdurende lewende wortels te hê in die stelsel. So dit praat tot gewasrotasies, dit praat tot dekgewas en dit gaan daaroor dat die plante deur fotosintese die grondekosisteem onder andere ook voed en aan die lewe hou en optimaal laat funksioneer. En dan laastens, maar nie die minste nie, om diere weer in die stelsel te integreer. Dierintegrasie is kernbelangrik, want dierintegrasie bring weer die proses terug van waar diere wy, wat lae voedingswaarde kos gebruik en na hoë voedingswaarde kos omskep met van proteïene, vleis en melk, maar dan ook die diere mis, die diere urineer, die diere herkou en hulle kwyl en daardie speeksel wat op die grond val, alles daardie het 'n impak rondom grondgesondheid en die produktiwiteit van die grondekostelsel.
So hoe lank duur hierdie periode en wat is die vernaamste faktore wat dit beïnvloed?
Landbou is konteks spesifiek. Elke plaas is uniek met sy eie invloede. So ons het oor die jare gesien dat boere in hulle kontekste begin om die beginsels van bewarings- en herlewingslandbou te implementeer. Ons praat van die sogenaamde pioniersboere wat met eie kapitaal en eie inisiatief hierdie pad van herlewing begin stap het. Wat ons soms vind, wat ons gesien het in praktyk, is dat daar 'n aanvanklike winsdaling is. So wat gebeur is, soos wat die stelsel van chemiese ondersteuning gespeen word, praat nie van organies noodwendig nie, het gaan net oor mindere chemiese insette, is dit moontlik dat jou omset daal, jou opbrengste per hektaar daal. Dit word in 'n mate teengewerk deur die feit dat jy laer kostes het, laer insette, maar ons in ons beplanning en in ons modellering neem ons aan ag dat jy wel 'n mate van winsdaling aanvanklik kan ervaar en dit moet uit die aard van die saak deur 'n befondsing oorbrug word. Dit is ook nodig om jou toerusting en implemente in baie kontekste te verander en ook diere-integrasie. Dit is baie moeilik in die meeste gevalle om diere met tradisionele skuldfinansiering dan nou te kan koop. So dit is belangrik om te verstaan, daar is 'n periode van potensiële kontantvloeidaling voordat 'n mens dan op 'n hoër, meer volhoubare vlak stabiliseer en verder groei.
Hierdie periode moet met befondsing oorbrug word, maar die tradisionele manier van befondsing is nie noodwendig geskik om hierdie boerdery oor die periode van laer kontantvloei te befonds nie. Wat is julle voorstel? Wat is jou antwoord?
Die periode van daling is baie konteks spesifiek. Dit hang af in hoe mate die grond gedegradeer is, of daar enige nog lewende biologiese aktiwiteit in die grond oor is, hang af van die grondtipe, maar die grootste aanduider van sukses hier, of die grootste hulpbron vir sukses hier, is toegang tot water. So, hoe meer water daar beskikbaar is, terwyl van reënval en op besproeiing, hoe vinniger kan die herstel plaasvind, want water is lewe. So in droër kontekste kan dit baie langer neem, 10 jaar, 15 jaar, byvoorbeeld in sekere areas waar daar baie lae reënval is, in areas met hoër reënval, kyk 'n mens na 3 tot 5 jaar. En dit hang ook af in hoe mate mens van die begin af die beginsels kan implementeer, of die kapitaal beskikbaar is om dit te doen, en ondersteuning is, want dit is nie 'n resepmatige proses nie. 'n Mens kan nie net werk met 'n sekere resep van gifstowwe of chemiese insette nie. So moet mense 'n plaaskonteks verstaan, en as 'n mens ondersteuning het van mense wat reeds die pad gestap het, studiegroepe en navorsers wat in hierdie veld werk, om mense te motiveer en te help om die pad te stap, maak dit die kans op sukses net soveel beter.
Nou ja, so sê Nick van Skalkwyk. Hy het vandag met ons gesels oor Herlewingslandbou en hy is die uitvoerende direkteur van Restore Africa Funds.